Welcome back, fellow armchair generals. This is Gamer 1745 here with my continuing look at Black Ice for Hearts of Iron 3, the 10.41 version. This is necessary for me to upgrade the Third Reich Events mod, and also to helpful in both keeping the channel going and the modding effort. I want to thank Sir Toyjet and Chief, and of course the Hoffmanator for your support on Patreon. It really does help. Now, Luigi has asked if I can elaborate on historical IC expansion. I'm interested. I don't like the idea of not producing sufficient tanks and planes for years because industry is expanding. Is that historical? No, it is not historical. Again, there's a lot of great things with Hearts of Iron 4. The idea that you have what they call civilian ICs over there, which could also sort of be called construction ICs, if you will, for there, versus military ICs. Some of the machine tools that you use to make guns could be set up to make other machine tools or parts thereof. Some of the pressing machines, could be pressing some of the machine tools. But it's not really impractical for that. Now, Germany was expanding its industrial capacity. And industrial capacity is not just how many machine tools or presses. Press is something like you take a round flat disc, you put it in it, and goes shunk, and you now have a German helmet, or at least mostly there. There's a couple more little sort of pressing, roll the lip over, and a few other things like that. But you take a flat piece of steel and you actually give it more strength by putting it into a press. That's what they learned with, an automobile body, cars. If you have flat pieces of the automobile, the old style, I don't know, a lot of the modern stuff is done differently now, but the pressed automobile bodies, if it was just flat, that would be sort of flexible. You go wobble, wobble, wobble. But once you put it through a press machine, and get it sort of pressed into a shape, it hardens itself and makes it much more rigid and good for that. With that kind of stuff, you still need to do, a bar frame. So, presses and machining tools are some of the major elements of production. Those are important, but also important are the buildings. You read about or, talk about documentaries, literally taking an armaments factory off of a train and setting it up out in a field somewhere, and the Soviets starting to, make rifles or make hand grenades or whatever again. And that kind of thing did literally happen. I think very quickly, as quickly as practical. They were on the other side of the train tracks. They were building the factory to then move the machines into the factory because they know winter's coming and you can't, produce out in the under 2 or 3 feet of snow. So. And I don't know how common, literally just into a field, but I do know it happened. So you need some of the infrastructure. And to sort of illustrate some of that, most, if not all, of the manufacturing facilities for railway engines in America, once the U.S. goes to war, are converted over to tank assembly factories. And I want to key in that word assembly, because they, at least mostly, weren't making the components. I'm not going to say absolutely not. No, they weren't. Again, some of the, I don't know. They probably converted for a time some of the machinery that would make the, the combination of casting and then machining on the cast. The railway engine wheels, doing those over to tank wheels or whatever, but mostly they're just assembly plants. And the reason they used them is because they had huge overhead cranes that could pick up railway engines and move them around in either completed or partially completed form, before you even put on wheels. And you can move them around the factory. So you have, if you just have a building that you can't lift up and move a tank around, how do you even move the tank body? And doing the welding of sections, whether they're cast sections or whether they're, flat steel that's already, cut to shape, but you just need to weld them in assembly. That's what I'm talking about. They were doing a lot of that in railway engine factory. Eventually it gets to the point that they build enough purpose-built tank factories that all but one of the railway engine factories convert back to making railway engines. I forget which one. One of them was actually just doing such a fantastic job making tanks. They go, yeah, you guys just keep making tanks. You're doing great. All the rest, because they, eventually want to increase the rail capacity in America, but they're also doing Lend-Lease engines and other rolling stock to the Soviet Union and as well as to other places in the world. So they wanted more engines to be built as well, railway engines. So all but one of the factories gets converted back eventually during the war to railway production. So part of it is the literal building and how the building is structurally built to accommodate, if you're building huge naval guns, those big barrels, you got to be able to have, internal cranes to move them around. But if you're building rifle barrels, you don't. And the machinery used to build those two different things are not the same. Germany was also increasing, and I was talking to Lum about some of this stuff, is still today, including some of the stuff in America that the U.S. captures at the end of the war, are still some of the only big press machines and some of the only big machining tool machines that are still in use today. And we don't really even have the capacity in the world currently to replicate them that were captured from Germany after World War II. Hermann, it's called Hermann the German, I think is a huge super crane that was made during World War II in Germany that is still in use in Los Angeles Harbor because it was very well built. And it's one of the few big cranes out in the world to lift heavy things in and off of ships. So Germany was building up this industrial capacity during this time. And I don't have a lot of details to give you about date and time of building these industrial capacities to right now. I don't even know how much of the records still exist. But also another example is during this time period of, at least from when the Nazis are in power, but I sort of kind of think it's from 36, somewhere between 36 and 39, I believe it was, but maybe it's 35. Germany sells to the Soviet Union steel rolling machine. You know what, you like recently got a photo of the huge machine that they were using to make the Tiger turret. Tiger tank turrets, the sort of horseshoe shaped stuff. And there's, you take the big thick piece of armor and you roll it through this rolling machine and eventually shape it into the, semicircular sort of horseshoe shape. That's the most of the rounded part of the Tiger. They're putting on the flat front face for the, where the gun mounts that they were building. They sell at least one of these machines, and there may be a couple of them, to the Soviet Union. Well, I think the Germans thought the Soviets needed it to build ships. And the Germans were like, yeah, we'll just sink them. And so they sell these big steel rolling machines that the Soviet Union did not have the capacity to manufacture. Now, could they have eventually, build the precursor steps to get there? Yeah, they could. Now, I don't know how long it would have taken them. I don't know what industrial effort it would have cost them. Could they have possibly built some of these rolling machines or bought them somewhere else? Yes, Britain and the U.S. also had them, and I think Japan has them as well. but the U.S. and Britain definitely had similar. These aren't the biggest ones that I was talking about earlier that still the U.S. got and are still left over from World War II that only Germany made, but these are some big ones. Um, yes, there was possibly, if the U.S. or Britain was willing to sell them, they could have possibly gotten them somewhere else. But these steel rolling machines are the only thing that allows the Soviet Union to make the main rolled steel armor for the T-34 and the KV tanks. They did not have, I mean, that's part of the reason the T-26, the T-35, all the, the big sort of land battleship tanks that the Soviets made, handfuls of those, and huge numbers of the T-26 and the BT-5 and BT-7 tanks, is they all have thin armor because that's all the Soviets can make. That's part of the reason. Now, part of the reason, at least for the BT-7s, well, they are super fast, light, running around a big country. You also want a lot of T-26s to, be cheap. Now, the land battleships, well, you might, you put too much armor and they can't move, but, compared to the engine. But still, they don't have a heavy tank, a heavily armored tank. They have big tanks, but they don't have heavily armored tanks. And so you could take one of those big land battleships like the T-35, take those engines and stick it into a physically smaller tank, but weighs the same with thicker armor. Well, they can't do it because they don't have the steel rolling machines. They buy them from Germany. Okay, all this is given in evidence, Luigi. And again, I don't have either in front of me facts and figures. And Adam Toz's books might have some of that stuff that talked more specific about industrial expansion. But Germany is industrially expanding during this time. Capabilities. The Nibelungen works get built in Austria, or former Austria, once they take it over, and that's a massive tank factory. So they're building ICs in Austria, the Nibelungen works. Sort of like the Nibelungen and and I'm sure I'm butchering it a little bit, pronunciation, from the opera. Again, I blank on Hitler's favorite opera writer. What's his name? Not Mozart. I know that. I'd love somebody in chat to help me out with that. Who did the various plays in Beirut. For some reason, I always blank on names like this, so when I try to pull them up, Wagner. Yeah, yes, Wagner. That's it. Yeah, the Wagner play. And so they build the tank factory there, and there may have been some factory already existing, but if there is already existing factory, that it's a massive expansion, but really it's sort of basically a new tank factory production. So they're building ICs. Now, and so there really are, and I can't right now, and I'm sure I could dig up facts and figures on some of this stuff, but you have to realize there's a lot we don't know about the Third Reich. Germans were obsessive record keepers, and their records were generally accurate. But combination of bombing campaigns over Germany, big firestorms, as well as well-documented that they happened, bonfire parties, everything from, secret plans for whatever secret operation we're putting on the bonfire, as well as just truckloads of records of, food distribution records or whatnot. They were just burning everything at the end of the war, all over the place. And I don't know from, one factory to another to, Krupp versus the Gustloff works versus whatever. I don't know the records that survived. I think a lot of records do survive, but they're just not necessarily locked away that no one can see them. They're just locked away, and if you're the right type of researcher, they would let you in to research them maybe, but they're some of the companies are embarrassed because they might show records of slave labor or other things. So we don't know how, even some of the surviving stuff, how much is, would be available. But even then, even if it is sort of available, who's going and doing the research on it? Yes, Ice-T. Hello, Alberto. Um, so, the records, there's a lot of, and the Soviets capture a lot of records. Some of them, massive amounts, have been declassified, but not all, to my understanding. Most of the, at least basic construction type stuff in the U.S. has been declassified, to my understanding. Sometimes they classify things and don't tell anybody they even have it. But so records are incomplete. But we know there was significant expansion. Most of the stuff I've just given you is anecdotal, but descriptive expansion. I do know, and we talk about, is it the idea, is it historical to just focus in on expansion of ICs early and not build other units and equipment? Well, part of the way, my understanding, and some of this comes from Hilary Doyle, who is one of the experts on German tanks, as well as German tank production and whatnot. He's written some of the books that are the standard reference books. If you don't know who Hilary Doyle is, I've seen some interviews on him. Very much the tank manufacturing companies throughout to the end of the war, and from before to the end of the war, are all working on government contracts. And we're working to government contracts and bidded for government contracts. It was not a centralized, what people often think of, government demands you to make X tank. No, it's like, oh, hey, would you build Panthers for us? Well, we'll build Panthers for, $1 million a piece or whatever it would be. And, and we'll build it this model. And then you got to do government changing. Lots of contracts went on. I do know from this period, 1939, earlier, 1936, 38, whatever, the German army was ordering, hey, yeah, we want 60 of those Panzer Is because we want to drive them around and see how they work. And then, the company makes 60 Panzer Is in, let's just say 3 months. Because, they could maybe make them all in a month, but that would be shifting personnel and manufacturing equipment away from other things. And then once that month is done, then you got to shift them to something else. So yeah, we'll take 3 months to produce 60 tanks. And then the Germans drive them around for a while. Yeah, okay, we want 120 Panzer Is, but with these changes. Oh, okay, we'll produce 120 of these tanks, and they'll take, 4 months or whatever it might be. And so they produce these Panzer Is, and then they drive them around for a while. Maybe send a few off to Spain, do a few things. So they're piecemealing production. Instead of going, company, Krupp or whoever, start producing Panzer Is. How many can you produce a week? Oh, okay. You can produce 20 a week. Okay. Start producing 20 Panzer Is. And we'll start driving them around. And when we figure out how we want them changed, we'll tell you to change the current production. And if there are big changes, we'll request you to retrofit the changes and turn on production. They don't do that. Now, I can understand in 1936 and 1937 that they're still figuring out what the hell is a tank. I mean, yeah, they know what a Renault FT-17 is, but do you want to make a big super land battleship? Do you want to make a small light dashing about tank, or do you want to make a sort of a medium, what becomes like a Panzer III or Panzer IV? They're still sort of working out some of these details, and they don't think. Whoever they are, the combination of the sergeant who's driving the tank to the general who is in charge of the tank production board to, the colonels that are in the early Panzer development units, that are experimenting on how to do all this stuff. They don't see a rush for manufacture. So the companies don't see a rush to expand production capability. They're doing things like the Shell Plan, which, and again, you'll see it in TRE, and I know recently played it. They go from something to say like 250 types of motorcycles being made in Germany down to 60. And these aren't teeny, like different colors of motorcycles, but these are different sort of sets up of motorcycles, just to reduce the numbers of different types of motorcycles, different types of motor cars, and different types of trucks to 30, 40 different models of trucks or whatever it is, but instead of 120. So that it would, once you go to war, because they figured someday there was going to be a war, whether Germany's attacking everybody else or somebody's attacking Germany, it was the idea that war someday would happen, not that peace had broken out and will never be attacked again. We want to have a rational system to, one, be able to manufacture replacement parts for the currently produced trucks, as well as if the Army's going to take over production of trucks, there's going to be a limited variations of trucks, so you can make trucks in just a few styles, and spare parts will fit them to ease our logistics. So they're doing things like that, but they're not telling the truck factories, expand your factory production right now. They would expand it if the German government ordered more trucks, but the German government isn't ordering more. They're ordering trucks, but they're not doing it in a huge truck, motorization of the German army. They're still, and maybe for very good reason, in that they don't have enough oil or gasoline, they're still primarily relying upon. People often say horse transport. Yes, horse transport to a point, but it's really actually a mix of horse and trains. Trains to get them to, to here, and horses to go from here to here. So trains bring in, whether it's the division or bring in the division's ammo to this point, and then use the horse to go the last little bit. That's really, and if you look at World War I, that's really how it is. It isn't so much, they're not loading the wagons full of ammo and driving them across Poland. I mean, the wagons may or may not, because they often do, they do march. There are route marches that get, in peacetime or in war, that are just, going across territory. But they really use a lot of trains to move horses, to move whatnot. And sort of another aside here, I hope you like all these asides. I've seen some footage, and I've captured some stills of the footage of the huge victory parade in Berlin in 1940, after the defeat of France. Huge victory parade with military units, probably not mostly military units that actually fought in France, but military units. One of the things I find is sort of funny is a bunch of trucks, I don't know, 4 or 5 of them, big trucks, going in this victory parade. You know what they have in the back of the trucks, and what the trucks are designed to carry? They're specifically designed to carry horses. Okay, so they have trucks designed to move horses. As an American, I go, as a military plan, why not just have more trucks? Why have horses? But yeah, no, they had trucks to move the horses. And so, so much of the German army is still a combination of rail and horses. Now, we know the Germans are expanding their industrial capacity. We know the Germans could have expanded the industrial capacity more than they did. Okay, we know that. Just simply by going to these tank manufacturers and going, Alfred Krupp or whoever. Yeah, because they did it for like the Nibelungen factory. You got that factory that you're producing tanks over there? We'll pay you to double the capacity, basically build a second factory next to it. But work it in however you want to, whatever manufacturing, meaning it could be one sort of giant series of buildings, that you move the tanks around. It doesn't have to be separate factory, but basically double the IC production for tanks here. And Krupp would have said, Yeah, sure. You know, and if they're paying enough, they're paying an appropriate amount of money for it, and German government could have said, yeah, and also train up workers to to be able to operate the additional thing. And Krupp would have gone, well, how are we going to pay these workers? Oh, we'll give you money for it to pay the workers. Okay, yeah, sure. And they would have done it. There wouldn't have been an argument about it. There might have been some discussion on best practices. Aren't we overbuilding? Blah, 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 blah. Are you sure we're going to be producing tanks somewhat similar to this? Maybe you want to put square wheels on them instead of round ones. I don't know what they might be thinking that would need to be swapped out later on, but we know they could have expanded their production capabilities. Now, that's all to support both. We know they were expanding their ICs, one, and two, they could have expanded them more than they did. Okay. Now we're all, I don't know if retconning is the right word. No, we're what's the right word? We're looking backwards. We're looking at tank production levels, or aircraft or artillery or whatever, of what they did historically, and then from that trying to extrapolate how much their actual production capability was. And that's always going to be flawed. And you can simply go in and instead of one shift a day making tanks, you could go, well, what about two shifts, 2 12-hour shifts? Or maybe we should go 3 8-hour shifts to make that a 24-hour factory with minor disruptions as you convert over. Well, and what about going to 7 days a week, adding some more workers, not working all the workers 7 days a week, because they do need time off. I mean, rush orders, in the midst of a war briefly, sure, but you need time off, in a real practical sense. And it actually makes better productivity. So yeah, add enough workers, so maybe it's almost equivalent to 4 shifts, just because you're rotating, 5 days a week and sort of shifting around. And that's in the same level of factory, you're just keeping it working 24/7 instead of working 8 hours or 10 hours a day, 5 days a week. So we can try to do some of that. Well, we don't quite know. We don't have all the figures, so we're guessing. And I will say this, as war games developers, because me as a modder, the Black Ice team as modders, or Paradox, we're all war games developers. We're all developing this war game. We may not be developing, a fresh, complete game, and we may be doing a lot of this for free, the modders, but we are war game developers. We are game developers. We're developing a game. Okay, so we can't know what they were. We can only know maybe what they did, not what they were capable of, but what they did, maybe, because their records aren't all there of what they did. All right. Okay. Now, so we're making maybe fairly well educated guesses, but we're making guesses. Okay, on the one end. On the other end, and this is still going back to Luigi's question of historical ICs and production. Now, I would say there's two types, or two, in my opinion, best types of people who want to play a war game. One, and I think, and I've been starting, and I'm going to continue playing War in the East too. I think that it matches much more of, for production and things like that, what was available. So the starting of that Barbarossa is setting up the order of battle for Germany and its allies, as well as the Soviets, as historically correct order of battle for Barbarossa. Okay. And then you start out and then you attack the Soviet Union. Now, of course, you can maybe surround more units and destroy more Soviet units, or you can have less units of yours destroyed or less combat losses within your units, because there are things like within War in the East too, individual trucks and individual artillery pieces within those units. It's not just a fixed number. It isn't just something like, oh, it's a flat gun or not a flat gun unit. No, it's a flat gun unit, and it's sort of like Hearts of Iron 4, and that it has X number of X type of flat guns within that unit. If you go into combat and you lose more than you did historically, more of your production will go to replacements versus. So as time goes on, it can shift from what the historical quantities were there, but you're starting at a historical basis, and you're seeing how well you can fight Barbarossa. Now, of course, you can follow the standard historical plans and see whether you get as good as or better or worse die rolls than they did historically, or you can change plans. Right. And so, but that's sort of basing it off of historical Barbarossa and following on with the idea that there's, other fronts and other priorities for equipment and production. And so if you want to, and I know Klaus, who often watches this series, really wants to have a lot of historical orders of battle, because he wants to, invade Poland with the German historical order of battle and see how well he does with that. That is a very, very valid way to play a war game. Okay. And that holds some interest to me. But my primary interest is, and this is one reason why I have not made, not that I don't want to make a video series, and why I have not played the US or made a US video series. I already know how to win World War II as the US, because the US did it, okay? And it wasn't a close run thing. It was clear, easy to do. Now, could I maybe in a war game end the war faster because I sort of, know enough about history or whatnot, or the AI is stupid, or, of course we could also play against humans too, but maybe I could do it faster. Maybe I could do it better than historical in a war game. That reality and war games are of course different, but in a war game, maybe I can do it better. But I already know how to win World War II as America. So I read a lot of books, including like not too long, it's a few years now, but like, autobiography, or not autobiography, a biography of Admiral Nimitz, fighting the Pacific War, because I wanted to learn more about the Pacific War. What fascinates me about particularly Germany and World War II is, could the Germans have won? I believe yes, and I've talked a lot about it different times, so we won't go into that. They could have. Not that it would have been easy or assured or whatever, but they could have won. But it's how they could win. So I like to play a war game like, on a grand strategy game, as opposed to a tactical, this squad's versus that squad, advanced squad leader or close combat type games, but a grand strategy war game on a generally historically plausible principles. Earlier, hey Marcel, good to have you here, Marcel or Fritz or however, mentioned, there's penalties for invading Denmark in 1936 or something. Well, I'm not going to invade as a German player Denmark in 1936 because of various real world political situations. So I'm going to generally follow the ideas of what I see as the realities of World War II. So I'm not myself going to straitjacket myself into declaring war on Poland in September 39, because that's when they did it, yes. Well, Hitler thought he was going to have a brief war with Poland. He didn't think he was going to go to war with everybody else. Okay, so I like to look at something that is historically plausible. It's not, oh, well, what if Nazis were nice guys? No, Nazis are the bad guys. They're going to do bad guy things. But what if they had made reasonably appropriate choices for their bad guyness? Again, we're not trying to say they're not, but for their bad guyness, make reasonably appropriate choices. Could you have significantly different results? Like, Well, instead of, okay, we sign our Ribbentrop-Molotov pact in, September 39, and we go, okay, Soviet Union, we're going to do this, but we're going to wait till spring. Spring, okay. You guys get to come in from the east, and we'll take it from the west, and we'll take down Poland. But, we sort of kind of think Britain and France are not going to honor their treaty with Poland, but they might. And because they might, we've got to be very quickly ready to deal with that front. So we're going to have, a lot of divisions sitting over here, just in case they do. And if they do go to war with us, now we don't want them to, but if they do, we'll quickly, round up all of our forces after crushing Poland, move them over here, and then go crush them here. So I play the game mostly, not always, but going to war in early spring 1940 against Poland, because I don't need the winter or the Sitzkrieg or the phony war or whatever you want to call it, of just sitting here through the winter staring at the French and waiting for it. I'd rather just peacetime build up my army in preparations for a possible war with the Western Allies, because yes, I know what's going to happen, but we're going to go with, not have to make all the mistakes that Hitler's going to make. I also believe, along with my, another author, that Germany should have spent the second half of 1940 and the first half all the way maybe to the end of 1941 securing the Mediterranean, or helping Italy secure the Mediterranean, however you want to say that, secure all of this before because Nazis are still Nazis. They're still wanting to go to war with the Soviet Union. So waiting till 1942 to attack then. Now, of course, as this game goes on, the Soviet Union is going to continue building up its forces. It's going to be stronger in 42 than it is in 41. But would it be better to not have to have sort of an actual two-front war? You just sort of have the British out there sort of annoying you, and you're out there, annoying them with your submarines, getting ready for a, massive push into the Soviet Union, and also be better prepared as Germany. So I want to play a war game that I don't have to make the same mistakes Germany did. I don't have to make the mistake of not building up my infrastructure. I know this is a long talk, but I hope it's interesting. I build up my infrastructure more than they did historically. I can't tell you whether all of my IC productions are overbuilt than what they could have built, not overbuilt than what is historical. This is definitely more than historical. I'm not even going to, even for a moment, try to say this is the historical level of buildups. And now some of the stuff, we just set it to keep building here in Landsberg, Kessel, mostly because we have a heavy industry and they gave it to us when it was just 2 factories there. So we're just building to sort of match that there's a heavy industry. So we're cranking through all of these. So we're going to have more ICs than historical, I do believe. Again, we don't know exactly what they were historically. We're making guesses. So, yes, I'm not in any way trying to say, well, this is approximately what they did have. Now, I do believe between, you have every year you have the Nuremberg rallies that basically give you, I think it's basically 4 ICs. Maybe it's 6 sometimes, some years, and there's other things that just give you ICs, as well as conquering, peacefully in this stage, but conquering other ICs. There are things that expand your ICs, as well as with their mechanics in here, which you no longer get to build, but based upon your political leaders, it will give you either more, shipyards, or more ammo factories, or more heavy aircraft or medium aircraft or light aircraft factories, or more research labs, or more this or that or these other things based upon who's here. And so you might want to change this around. Now, TRE will be somewhat following the patterns of who gets what benefits, just because I'm going to go along with it, but it will be with my evaluations of the minister's effects uniquely for it. Again, that's my evaluation. Yes, They're wild-ass guesses. Now, they're relatively educated wild-ass guesses, because my armaments minister here, compared to Goring, it's just air organization and light aircraft practical decay. Well, I know that Goring, because he's armaments minister effectively, because he's in charge of the 4-year plan, they were very much working to increase resource production. So he gets more of that. And even as Air Force Minister, he gets a weak bonus to some resource production. I don't remember exactly the details as sitting here, just because even if he's not the armaments minister, there's still the Hermann Goering work still sort of working. So it's just like, yeah, it's still there, but not as big. So if you have them in both, you get more bonuses, but you also get detriments too. You can look them up. See the thing, and it'll be approximately the same, if not the same, next time. When we release the thing, so it'll be along those lines. So, I don't know what they could have done. I mean, I'm sure we could research it better and deeper, but like I say, how much are we going to spend people to send to archives in Russia, to send to archives in Germany, to send to archives in Britain, to send to archives in the U.S., to send to, I don't know, try to get into factory archives or whatever that might still be out there, and try to figure all this out. How much detail? Yes, read a few books. Okay, that's good surface knowledge. We're making reasonable guesses on this stuff. So, yeah, I believe we're probably, with all this stuff, overbuilding their actual capacity, but I don't know where to draw the line. And yes, if I was purely at this point, and by the beginning of 39, not building huge amounts of other things and purely spamming ICs as well, and you've also watched me in the series, build a lot of additional resource extraction, which some of it we can now see as unnecessary, but some of it probably wasn't. Some of it was needed back then. So maybe only half of what we did was necessary. So I'm trying to not make all the mistakes if we're going to war in approximately late 39 to early 1940. And this game just really, and it takes a lot of rework to sort of keep it going without going wonky in several ways, of waiting to sort of the 42 to 44 period that Hitler actually sort of thought the war would be. I think it's more 42, 43, that Hitler actually thought the war with the West was going to happen then. I don't know when he thought the war with the Soviets, because he wanted his 1939 war with Poland, then 2 or 3 years to build up more Navy, both submarines and surface ships, as well as improved tank designs, improved aircraft designs, to get ready to take on the West as sort of mostly as a rematch of World War I, to say, yeah, we can beat you guys. Then at some point he wanted multiple wars of expansion eastward. He didn't want to just defeat the Soviet Union and end up in Murmansk. Vladivostok. Murmansk is up over here. Yes, I do know my geography, but I speak once in a while. He wanted, take this section, and then 10 years later, take this section, and then 10 years, or whatever time periods, so that Germans can come in and occupy and be overlords, or just push the Eastern peoples further east. And, he wanted that to sort of be Germany's hardening every generation to go to war with the Eastern peoples for 4 or 5 years and harden the German up and keep moving east as they slowly go, because he really wanted to sort of be, I guess, Europe's version of America, and push to the Pacific from there. And he didn't want it all in one big take, because he knew they couldn't. He knew it would actually be detrimental to his vision of Germanness if they had to spread the German people all out as an occupying force over all of the Soviet peoples. Of his vision, it would be a detriment. So he didn't want it all. He wanted key resource areas, and definitely wanted to expand into the Ukraine and probably some of these other areas too in the first war, in 1941, 42, or whatever he thought that war was going to be, and get sort of this kind of chunk of an area. And then Russia whether it's Soviet Russia or some other Russia, gets to exist. And yeah, they're going to build up armaments, but we're going to build up armaments, and we're going to be ready for round 2, round 3, round 4, round 5. Generations after he's gone, they're going to keep moving east. That was his vision. Let's see what some of the chats have been saying. How do you think they could have made more ICs in the real world? Like streamlining and building. Okay, Challenge Boys. I guess you weren't here for the early part of it. You can go back and look at either the episode when it's published or earlier here. I talk about some of those in not too much detail, but in a bit more. Just the way they could have expanded things. And how to protect them in war. Okay, well, the best way to protect them in war is to not allow your enemy to attack them, meaning win the air war. You can go to the extremes of building factories underground, and that is an extreme. Obviously, you got to win the war, otherwise the enemy's going to put boots on the ground on top of you, but I think you're talking about bomb damage. You can disperse factories, you can put up anti-aircraft guns, you can do various things like that, but those are all tactical. They help, they're useful, they should be done to some degree. But mostly it's just win the air war. Is just do that. And you win the air war not just by putting up a line of radars for both day and night, interceptions and intercepting the Allied bombers, but you go on the air offensive and bomb their air bases. And you got to realize, Germany in 1940 starts out, they sort of ignore the chain home radar, which they really, if they had focused on that, would have made Britain's job much more difficult. I'm not saying they couldn't have won, but it would have been much more difficult. So they still had a whole, partially as a disguise, but also as a backup, as well as an identification. Because sometimes, they would see a big blob of incoming aircraft. They want to know, are they fighters? Are they bombers? What altitudes they're at? Where they're, details about them. So they had lots of spotters out there that were, using basically the telephone system into the central command. So yeah, they could have done it without the radar, but not as efficiently. But so the Germans do miss the opportunity of taking out the radar. But they start out the war with going after Britain's air power, because they know the air power is what is going to literally sink the invasion vessels, or a major element of that coming across. So they start to try to knock out British air power by bombing airfields, because it's not just putting holes in runways, but it's bombing the needed support elements for the aircraft, as well as trying to bomb the aircraft on the ground. That they're coming to try to do that. Well, once they switch over from that to the blitz of trying to bomb industry, and they stop bombing the airfields, gives the British the chance to rebuild their air capabilities that they were radically losing. Now they're getting hit at critical factories, but factories that they're able to survive well enough. They're really, to my knowledge, there are occasional air raids against air bases, but it really isn't until almost the end that Germany comes back and tries to do an anti-air base strategy. Part of setting up for the Ardennes offensive, the early sort of pre-stages to it, they do a bombing of air bases, some in France or on the continent, some over in Britain, but those are more meant just as spoiling temporary disruption attacks to give Germany the breathing space to do their offensive without being too hit by air power. But they really don't do a concerted anti-air campaign. Like they definitely do one against the early days in the Soviet Union, and they keep working at it there, but they just sort of give up. At least that's my analysis, and maybe there's somebody who knows the air war better than I do. Because the air war is something I've read about, something I've seen documentaries on, but it's not something I focused a lot on. So I'm sure I'm getting some details wrong. Maybe, hopefully not big ones, but they really don't seem to continue an offensive operation against the bombing campaigns. They seem to be purely a reactive. Try to shoot them down over target. Coming in, not trying to destroy the air bases that lined up with aircraft on them. Because most days, meaning more than half the time, those bombers are on an airfield. Okay, they're not bombing every day. They're bombing a lot, but they're not bombing every day. So if you fly over them, you may not know what day they're taking off and not, but if you have a 50-50 chance or better of flying over that airbase and finding the bombers on the ground and dropping bombs on them. Now, they're not doing that in a very effective way. So if it's purely a reactive, a defensive posture, even if you do it better than what Germany did it, you're still going to be losing a lot to your air. But if you go on offense and keep them, they'll still bomb some stuff because they still will be able to, whatever that amount is. But you should be doing a lot more damage to them and wrecking a lot more. So, yeah. And what does Luigi say here? 1942, his recorded conversation with Mannerheim is, he said he would have invaded the Soviet Union in 40 if it wasn't for the Allied declaration of war. Maybe he lied. Yeah, I don't trust any of that. I'm not saying that the conversation isn't true, but I don't trust Hitler on that. Hitler has a history of telling the audience what they want to hear. He in his election campaigning, he would go tell one group of audience on the same day, "Oh, I'm here for the Christian Germans, blah, 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 blah." Then go to another thing. We want to limit the influence of Christians in Germany. I mean, he would literally contradict himself on the same day, two different audiences, because they did not have, good press coverage of all of these meetings. And then you could, of course, claim that some of those were just lies, because didn't Hitler tell you the opposite? Blah, blah, blah. Hitler lies and tells the audience what they want to hear. So you need to look at other records. Hello. Das Kind Yugi Fan? Sorry, I'm butchering that. How you doing? Oh, sorry for butchering that. So yeah, I don't see. No, I don't see him going to war with the Soviet Union in 1940. I think that's mostly because of the Winter War and trying to placate Mannerheim. I'm not just. I think you are giving me a correct historical fact that Hitler said that, Luigi. And I know of the tape conversations. This is the only least known modern recording of him in his sort of normal conversational voice. I don't remember the conversations. I'm not disputing that at all. But Hitler spends so much time in 1939 making sure the Soviets do not enter the war over Poland. I do not think he thought it was time and ready to go to war with the Soviet Union. 4 months later? 5 months later? He's a politician? Yeah. All politicians lie. So this is one thing. Yeah. Well, Trump lies. Well, yeah, he's being a politician. He lies. Yeah. Now there's big lies and there's little lies. There's like saying, "Hey, I'm for American workers." Yeah, let's import everything from China. Be sort of maybe the Democrats and their supposed support for union workers, and then trying to import everything from China. Where Trump is like, "Yeah, I'm for American workers. Let's not buy stuff from China." So yeah, Trump lied. No, I'm not trying to get into modern politics too much here, but Trump lied, yes. But the Democrats lied just as much. Maybe about different things. Trump is about hand size and crowd size and how much everybody loves him. He's lying about. But I think Trump was like, "Hey, I went out of these wars." Democrats are like, "Hey, I went out of these wars. We're moving in more troops." So, the latest thing here is, oh yeah, Biden's announced that by September 10th, we'll be out of Afghanistan. Isn't that good? Trump's getting us out of Afghanistan. I mean, no, sorry. Biden's getting us out of Afghanistan. Isn't that great? Biden's getting us out of Afghanistan. Isn't that great? No, that's a lie. Biden is keeping us in Afghanistan because Trump set up with the Taliban to be out in May of this year. Okay. Trump was going to be out 6 months or whatever earlier. Biden is at least keeping them in 6 months or so longer. So Biden is keeping us at war in Afghanistan longer than Trump was going to do it. Trump was already going to get us out of Afghanistan in May. That's what he agreed to. He signed a peace treaty with the Taliban to be out in May. But no, Biden's keeping us at war longer. So Biden is lying. Trump just said what he thought. And that often turned out to be wrong or incorrect. And so you want to count it as a lie? Well, okay. But these other people are doing that stuff. So, but yeah, Trump's lies. It is sad it still works because it's not shown much still. Absolutely challenge, boys. And so, yeah, Trump was an exaggerator. I mean, that's because he's sort of a salesman. This is the best ever. Whatever it is, this bed, this wallpaper, or this plan for building infrastructure. This is the best ever. No president has ever done as good as this. He's a salesman. Or this is the worst ever. That's the way Trump spoke, and that's sort of, I got used to it and sort of then not cared anymore. Where a lot of the people who don't like Trump cared about that something is the best ever or the worst ever. And you turn on a dime on somebody. He's the worst person in the world. Oh, he's the best person in the world. He loves North Korean diplomat. No, he's trying to get peace in North Korea. He's trying to have a peaceful thing. So he'll say whatever bullshit, either publicly or privately, to Kim Jong-un to try to get peace. Okay? He didn't like Kim Jong-un. He wasn't liking dictators. He was just trying to get deals with these people. Whether the deals are going to be good deals and I agree with them or not, that's another question. But that's what he was trying to do. So yeah, as you can tell, I don't like everything Trump did. I'm not saying, you go, but Trump did this bad. Okay, yeah, Trump has his major flaws. But, politicians lie. Okay, and Hitler lied. Hitler lied a lot. Hitler contradicted himself. So I've read books on Hitler. I've taken a university course on Hitler. I am still trying to figure out what, and Hitler changes his mind over time. I'm not saying like from day to day. I'm saying, what he may have thought in 1934 versus what he thinks about something in 1944. His mind does change. People are like that. So he may have really meant something in 1934 and mean something the opposite in 1944, but, and not talking about lies, but just changing his mind over ideas and things. He does evolve, Hitler, looking at Hitler. So you sort of have to look at when you're looking at Hitler, but you try to figure out what is real and what is sort of he's telling the lies. And you sort of have to work that out, and that's just not clear. And so you often find people use Hitler to smear others. Well, Hitler liked, no, he may have not. He just said stuff. Selling Soviets heavy machineries that may help them defeat us in the future. Yes, the Art of the Deal, 1939. Absolutely, Sten Killer. Like I was saying before, they do. Sell a lot. They sell the one of the, I forget which one, but one of the motorcycles with sidecar. I don't know if it's the Z-Puds or the BMW or whatever. One of the models, they set up a factory to build motorcycles and sidecars for the Soviets and make them throughout the war. They sell both the machinery and the plans and all this stuff, and set up a factory for making anti-tank guns, the same model that the Germans have in 37 millimeter. The Soviets just increase it to 45 millimeter, but otherwise functionally basically the same. I don't know that the parts are quite swappable, but you can look at the design of the Soviet 45 millimeter anti-tank gun. It's the same as the Pak-36. They're selling that technology to the Soviets. So yeah, and this whole episode is Luigi's fault. If no one knows from his question on historical ICs and building up. So I try to look at a grand strategical war game like this as, how can I do something that is still realistic within history, within the historical basis? Nazis are still Nazis, communists are still communists. Democracies don't want to go to war, but will once they're pushed far enough. Those kind of principles. What can you do to do things better, to either be victorious or just be better at it? Britain better handles things, or can you defend France or whatnot? And how can you do that within the realities? That is where I find my greatest fascination with war games. Now, I also like tactical war games, metal tanks on a, board, on a 3D real world map, or computer games that do similar sorts of stuff, or literally driving them like in War Thunder. Those are fun too. I enjoy those as well. But if I was going to play, I don't know, a war game of a bridge too far coming into across these rivers, if I was going to play, I would be more, I guess, well, on both sides, because the Germans do it is a bridge too far, but could the Germans have held them at the second bridge instead of the third? Or could you have, done some little differences? Obviously, you have the radio communications for the paratroopers that land. That's an easy fix. If you can fix that and this go, have the radios work right. Okay, good. I mean, that's sort of a simplistic thing, but other tactical things you could look at, is how to do something different instead of just following the same plan, and see if your die rolls are any different than what the historical die rolls. I'd rather have a little bit of freedom of trying different options than being, stuck to the historical script. But yeah, still looking at a basic idea of crossing these rivers and, getting in here. The whole idea is you have the Rhine here. The Americans are sort of pushing this way, and they're really worried about the Rhine. I mean, they were also earlier really worried about the West Wall, which turned out to not be much of a thing for the Americans to get through. Really worried about crossing the Rhine. Is that going to be a major thing? It stalls it out for months and months. Give Germany breathing room until 46 or something. I don't know. They're really hoping that if they get across here, that and this river is something, but nothing like the Rhine, I gather. And then being able to push, swing north around into Germany this way, if that had done fast, efficient, and move and get that going before the Germans could react. What's the plan for tomorrow? Well, right now, hopefully, War Thunder, maybe if there's enough people that want to play Enlisted, I would happily play Enlisted. Don't know how many people want to play Enlisted, but that's a possibility. I've yet to set up my test playthroughs multiplayer of Hearts of Iron 3 that okay, sure, Eric. We'll see. It depends on who's there and what people want to do. I'm flexible going both ways. Well, I think we're going to end this episode, Luigi special of that. Well, Hitler wasn't consistent intellectually. You can see it in his writings. You can see it all around. I mean, he had some basis of, struggle. People need struggle to be strong, nations, whatever. And once that going on, he wants conflict and struggle. That's one thing he's consistent on, but there's a lot of other stuff he floats around on. Well, thanks everyone for getting this far. Really do appreciate it. I hope everyone... No, you didn't ruin the episode. You changed it. I hope it's fun to watch. I'm going to have to tag this one as a bit different because there's no gameplay, but we did talk about things. So do appreciate all of that. See everyone next time for more, yes, even more Hearts of Iron.